Welcome to the Sonic Days podcast, home of all things audio. This season was recorded live at Sonic Days 2024. What happens when silence becomes the medium? How do curators design soundscapes without sound? And can we truly experience an auditory world through our imagination? In this episode, we're joined by Alcina Cortez, who unpacks the concept of sound as a mental phenomenon. Together, we explore how museums use or deliberately choose not to use acoustic sound in exhibitions, and how this shapes the way we experience art.
Here I am, very happy to be here and to have the possibility and the opportunity to be at Sound in Museum's first conference. It is called Sound as a Mental Phenomenon, and I say in my abstract that I'm be focusing non-acoustic objects, but in fact I'm going to focus both non-acoustic and acoustic objects, because I think that's the two objects that museums use the most. Of course, non-acoustic, it's a long practice, and acoustic objects. So I'm going to focus both. But you will see as the presentation goes on. So it is now very common to say that sound is increasingly being exhibited in museums, you know. I think we've been saying this for a long time, so it is now the time to move a little bit further and think how sound is being exhibited in museums, and to examine it that precisely, not just to map and to say that sound is being exhibited in museums and discussing it as a heritage object and artifact. Of course, this is important. And I also think that nowadays to think of sound in museums is not to think only in sound. It's to think sound and the environment, acoustics of the whole exhibition. So even if I don't exhibit sound in an exhibition, I have to consider sound in a larger way, which is to consider the acoustics of the room and the gallery. So for me, when I talk about sound nowadays, it's not about sound specific, but the whole environment of everything. So let's consider this example, for instance. This is a painting from Francis Bacon. It's a retrospective that is running now in the National Gallery in London. And I put it here because you can exhibit it here, the painting like this. And you can have a meaning. And you can, inside your head, have an interpretation of this painting. So this is a soundscape, because if you go to a museum, you have a soundscape of this painting. But I can also use, as a curator, I can decide to put a soundscape, another soundscape. I would ask you to please look at the painting and see if the meaning somehow changes while you're seeing this painting. Or I can put another one. And I imagine it changed somehow the meaning of the painting, like you are in a film. So I'm not arguing that you have to use sound at all times. It's not it. But you have to decide, when I say that you have to think in sound, is that we have to decide if you want to have sound or not. And if you want to have sound, what is the kind of meaning that it elicits? That's what I think in this stage that we are now. It's not just saying, okay, I'm going to use sound, let's put this, oh, it's wonderful. No, we have to know from the visitors what the kind of meaning sound is eliciting. So this is why I put this. This is to tell you that I'm completely aware that we need to conduct a lot of research with museum goers to see how are we using sound, if it is effective or not, and how we have to use it. To use sound doesn't mean that we use sound at all times. We might have some experience in which we don't want sound. We want the people to be profiting from the exhibit without the additional sound. So I'm conducting now research about expressive and meaning-making capabilities of sound, which is something that I think it is very important and will help us take curatorial decisions. My presentation will going to be mainly conceptual, because I love concepts. Some people love to do practice. I love to do theory and concepts. I think the theory and concepts are very wonderful to let us understand the world in a better way. And as long as they help us to understand the world in a better way, then we are doing science. So my presentation will be mainly conceptual. The literature in music studies, musicology, ethnomusicology, popular music studies, sound studies, so far, in terms of meaning making, have produced a lot of literature telling that sound can offer a sensorial potential. What is this? It is when sound has a materiality and it reaches you in a certain way and in your body and your senses, and you have a response, not a cognitive response, but an instinctive one. Sound has emotional meaning-making opportunities, as you all know. This is very well discussed, and discussed by psychology of music, musicology, ethnomusicology, and so forth. Sound could have, for museums, a representational meaning in the sense that you can put a sound and it can point to a subject. Let's imagine that I am in an exhibition about the nature and you have a lot of sounds about the nature. If you put the sound of nature, sound is representing the nature. So it is doing the same thing as a picture or something like that. Sound can have social meanings, of course, in the sense that music is a social practice, and being inside a soundscape can enhance a social awareness that we are all together and working together and living together and making our sociality through the ears and sound. And sound can also lead us to imagination. This is not very well spoken, not very most addressed in nowadays, but I think it's a very important dimension that visitors, when go to museum, use sound in terms of imagination as well. And all of these layers, I have separated them for a scientific purpose, but all of them are part of an overall experience, which I call an aesthetical experience. Of course, you should say, oh, but you are saying that sound leads us to imagine, but at the same time it is emotional and social, of course. So it is everything at the same time, but we need to separate to understand things separately, otherwise it is a mess, and I hate messes. I love to understand. This is how you do medicine or how you do chemistry, everything. You don't study everything at the same time. So you can't study the aesthetic experience at the same time. And so in this presentation, I'm going to focus in imagination, because I think it is very important. You all know that when you hear music, we started to imagine a lot of things. So this is a very important thing. For instance, Theodore Grassic, which is a philosopher of music, he says that listening is both perceptual and imaginative. And imagination engagement is normally required to appreciate music when listening to it. So, although imagination is not very talk in presentations about sound in museums, there's a lot of talks that point to this role of music and sound. And in this presentation, now getting back to the beginning, I'm going to be discussing how we use imagination with acoustic representations of music and sound and non-acoustic. Because museums have a long experience with representing music with sound in a non-acoustic way. And we are going to talk about that. Acoustic ways is that why we are now discussing in sound in museums. We all discuss, okay, put music, put sound, put a soundscape, put whatever you want. Non-acoustic are the oldest. For instance, I can have a painting and it can have a layer sound as well. I will give you an example. So I think we have to bear in mind that museums would never be just sound. We always have to take care of the visual as well. So we have to think about imagination in both ways. But I'm going to separate them again for science, for clarity, because I can't speak of all of them. So some theorics, a lot of them, but Grassic again, he says that hearing in is a reported phenomenon which points to the fact when you imagine sound through an object, okay? Acoustic examples. We can hear in something through the acoustic examples. And Grassic says, hearing in and seeing in are alike in that each involves imaginatively experiencing a perceived object to be something more than it is. So that's what we do a lot of times in museums. And I want to understand what we do, okay? And Grassic goes further on and he says that hearing in could be stimulated by an acoustic object that functions as a prop. And for a prop, he says that A prop is when sounds, particular features are effective in guiding listeners to imagine an intended state of affairs. So this is when sound is very specific in terms of guiding your imagination. I'm going to give you examples. And Grassic also says that acoustic objects can function as triggers. And for triggers, he says that a trigger is when listeners' imagination flowed free from intermusical sound guidance, generating idiosyncratic content. Of course, this is again a conceptual separation. There are times when you have both experiences, but there are a tendency for one object or another to function in one way or another. Let me give you an example. For instance, this was an exhibition exhibited in 2017-2018 at the British Library, which was listing 140 years of record sound. So this was the first time the British Library put in exhibition towards the audience. A lot of them, because you know the British Library has a huge record of sound records, so they function as an archive. And this was the first time they did an exhibition about their archives. And they did a lot of hearing points with a lot of sound artifacts. And these sound artifacts was very specific, like political discourses or some representations of wildlife. So I would say that in this case, the acoustic objects are function as props because they point you towards an object in the sense that a political discourse, of course you can imagine you were in the house of your grandmother when you were young and you were hearing this discourse, but the object is more objective in comparison to another example, which is coda-to-coda exhibition. This was an exhibition done at Science Museum, they called Robots, in which they put sounds of robots. So again, it is my idea to show that this is a prop because the sound example points very specifically to the object of robots. So these are two examples that I gave you about a prop. A prop is when you are stimulated to imagine or to interpret in an objective way. But if we go again to this painting and the music I put a few minutes ago, you can say that it functions as a trigger. And a trigger is more wild in comparison to a prop. Whereas a prop is more specific, a trigger can be more wild. And again, you have this example in which sound can change your interpretation and your imagination according to the sound that you are hearing. And can lead you wherever you want. I don't know where are you going. I can ask you to write a story. That's what I'm doing now in my research. I am researching in exhibitions with sound, with stories, asking people to write stories. What are they imagining through these examples and things like that? But you can go wherever you like, and I have no idea, unless I studied it, I have no idea where are you going and your imagination is going. But I also have here another one. This is an example of Basquiat exhibition at Philharmonie of Paris. So Basquiat was a painter. He died very young. I don't know if you are fond of him. But he was also a lover of music. And they did an exhibition with his paintings with the soundscape. And I think that his soundscape can be also very effective in changing the meaning and lead you everywhere. To conclude about the acoustic examples, although I've been talking about sound, I don't have the time to go deep in this, but actually what neuroscientists are saying today is that hearing is not only about hearing. It's multisensorial, and I can hear as well with the body, also here can stimulate some taste in my mouth. I am also stimulated by images and by smells. It is multisensorial. So I'm just giving this slide to bear this in mind, that we have to dig into several dimensions, although we are focusing on sound. Now let's move to non-acoustic examples. Acoustics is the branch of physics that deals with the study of sound waves and their behaviors. Sound is considered an acoustic phenomenon in the sense that its waves are transmitted through the air. That's what we'll be talking about. But you can also have non-acoustic phenomenon does refer to sounds that not originate from actual sound waves, but are rather imagined and perceived with the mind. So in these examples that I'm discussing right now, I'm discussing the imagination in your head with non-musical examples, so they are non-acoustic examples. This is called, from sound studies, phonομνέsis. This is a term that sound studies scholars have been using. And phonομνέsis is a mental activity that involves internal listening. A lot of theorists have been calling this phenomenon music imagery through the mind's ear. So mind has also a ear. A lot of theorists have been talking about this as well, the experience of imagining musical sound in the absence of directly corresponding sound stimulation from the physical environment or the melodies of the mind, a mental replay of music, a mental soundscape audible for the inner ear. I think you have well understood what is a non-acoustic object, and experiences that I can report is voice narrating a story or a description. If I describe the terrible sound of an earthquake, you can imagine it. Hearing an earworm, you all have this. Or audiating a musical score, mentally rehearsing a musical performance. This is for musicians, but it happens a lot as well. Imagine a new musical composition. All of these can raise a musical imagery through your mind's here. But I also have these ones, and I want to focus more on last ones, which are imagining sound by observing visual stimulus in museums. A visual stimulus can lead you to imagine sound. And imagining sound through bone conduction and vibrations. We can, of course, discuss the extent to which a bone vibration is non-acoustic, but I'm using it as a theoretical conceptualization here. I'm going to discuss these last two examples because I think these related to museums, not these ones, but these ones in particular relate to museums, and I'm going to discuss them through these artists, Hieronymus Bosch, Katie Patterson, Christian McLeod, Geneviève Cadu, and Ricardo Huisman. Let's start by Hieronymus Bosch. I think you all know him. This is a painting, a triptych that is exhibited in Museum d'Art Antiga in Lisbon. This is a painting from, as you know, the 15th or 16th century, so it's a very old painting. But you can argue, of course, and I'm examining this with visitors in Portugal, we can argue that this painting has a sound dimension. And how can you test this? You ask the visitors to please write a story, a small story about what do they see in this painting. Because I hear a lot of things. This is not a very good, well reproduction because it is smaller, but you have a lot of birds and things like that. And this looks like an aura thing, explosions and everything. So there's a sonic dimension in this. This is what I wanted to stress, that as sound researchers in museums, we should embrace all the phenomena, not only sonic phenomena, but also non-acoustic phenomena, because there is a sonic dimension everywhere. In the acoustics of room, in the galleries, everywhere, and you could explore it. You should be aware of that, because I can do a special exhibition. Imagine I do an exhibition with paintings and say, this exhibition is about hearing, and I select a range of paintings for people to focus on sound. So we can curate things as well as we understand conceptually the paintings or the object, and we separate them, and we know how the visitors use them, then we can use them in exhibitions with an intention or another. So that's what I'm trying to do, to separate and to test the meaning-making opportunities each one does. This is a way of having a musical imagery. There are a lot of them in paintings, of course, and you can explore that. So I have here a video about Katie Patterson. She did an installation work which is called Earth, Moon, Earth. This is very interesting. She's very keen of studying the Earth and everything. And so she did an installation which I'm going to show you the video. And the idea is that she had a piano playing the Moonlight Sonata. And the idea is that she is projecting the Moonlight Sonata to the moon. And with the light, the moon projects the Midnight Sonata back to to the earth. But she develops the idea that because of light is not working very well, when the moonlight sonata is getting back reflected to the earth, there are some mistakes. And so the piano plays the moonlight sonata without a few sounds, and you are led to imagine sounds. I have here put the video.
I'm from Glasgow, studied in Edinburgh and then at the Slade School of Art, and now I live in Berlin. I've made a lot of work that involves collaborating with other people, scientists, astronomers, cosmologists, supernova hunters, lots of different people, and very generally I make work that collapses distance and time and works with space, often bringing together the very commonplace with the more intangible and kind of vastness of space and time. At the moment I've got a solo exhibition on at the Ingleby Gallery in Edinburgh. This is the first time that I've worked with Jupiter. I'm showing a work called Earth, Moon, Earth in one of the barns for the duration of the Ingleby show, so the two shows are kind of partnered together. Earth, Moon, Earth is a kind of old technology, sometimes called moon bounce as well, where people are sending signals in Morse code to the moon, and then the information bounces back from the moon. It just sounded so odd, and it sounded a bit unreal and maybe a bit science fiction-y, but I just prodded a bit further and then found out there's this community of people. I decided to send a piece of music, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, and I broke that into Morse code, note by note. It was sent to the moon, returned to Earth, but when it came back the code was slightly altered. The keys move up and down by themselves, and it gives a kind of ghostly feeling. So there's no person playing the piano, but you can, you instantly recognise that it's a Moonlight Sonata, but then if you listen carefully, you notice there's these little gaps in the score. I wanted it to come back kind of touched by the moon or altered by the moon. And so when you're listening to the score at the beginning, it feels really quite complete. But bit by bit over the score, it starts really breaking up, and towards the end, there's whole chords missing, and yeah, you can kind of imagine that these are drifting up somewhere lost in space.
So you got the idea. She stops some keys and you have to imagine them. So this is a work that plays with the musical imagery and uses a very known piece for you to imagine sounds. So another example is by Christian McClay. This guy, I'm completely a fan of him. I saw an exhibition by him in Paris, a retrospective of Christian McClay. I saw the most imaginative works I've ever seen. I'm going to present only the examples related to our non-acoustic imagery. So here he plays a lot with these strips from comics when he wants you to imagine these sounds through the painting. So this is again an example of mental imagery, and all of you imagine in different ways because you have an idea for Badum. You have your own experience and your idea of Badum. Is it louder? Is it lower? He put it lower, so you might imagine, even if the things are up or down, you might imagine in a different way. He also has this work with a lot of screams. These are extracted from comic books, but it is impossible not to hear a very noisy scenario from this. So this is your imagination again, working from a non-acoustic object. And he also has this example, which I love the most. Is you enter into darkened gallery with 4 walls, very dark, and he plays a video installation with a lot of onomatopoeias playing in rhythms and above and lower, and you can imagine a composition. There is no sound absolutely, just onomatopoeias for you to imagine sounds. And once you are there for a long time, you start hearing a lot of compositions in your mind. It's so interesting. Christian McClay says, absence is a void to be filled with one's own stories. I find silence is much more powerful because in silence we can think about sound. Silence is the negative space that defines sound. Acoustic is the positive and non-acoustic is the negative. A last example, I saw it in Canada. This is a normal one, but it is explored in terms of sound. So Geneviève Cadieux, she did this production. How long does it take for a voice to reach another? She's intended with this to be very suggestive or for you to hear something in these paintings. So this is clearly a non-acoustic example which lead you to imagine sound. And I forgot, I have another one, which is by Ricardo Huseman. So this is the example I have for bone conduction. Let's see, because I have a video for you to show. He has done this beautiful installation. The thing is that the person are exploring this through this bone, although we are hearing now, he has made this bone a device for you to experience, and the visitors are expected to embrace and to hear at the same time in the headphones. So this is an installation in which he wants you to experience also for bone conduction. Of course, we have bone conduction as well for deaf people, and then in that case it is only bone conduction, but in this case he also used hearing and bone conduction. I love it. To conclude, I want to say that sound is in our agenda, of course, but what I think we have to do now is to research with museum goers and visitors how they are experiencing sound, in which way, for us to take curatorial decisions informed. And we have to separate and classify all of these type of experience for us to want to use for a specific objective or another objective, and to stress one objective or another with sound. That's my work right now. That's it.